So when you just stand here, you kind of look around and maybe you don't notice anything right away. But then, over here, Sandy, this is why we brought you here. Oh, wow.
In our search for lost artifacts, Dave and I have had the privilege to investigate one of the most iconic World War I battlefields, Vimy Ridge.
It was here on this land in April of 1917 that the Canadians attacked straight up the ridge, right into a heavily defended German position. At the end of the day, the Canadians were victorious, but it came at a huge cost.
The Vimy Ridge Memorial now stands as a reminder of the many Canadians' lives lost and the true sacrifice of all Allied soldiers who fought for freedom during the First World War.
On one of our trips to Vimy Ridge, we got a lead on a lost artifact. But this was not on a battlefield or even in a museum.
We drove a few kilometers to an extraordinary place, the ruins of an old church, and there we met up with a Canadian expat, Valerie Bent Stewart.
This is a church from the 16th century.
Well, this is quite something, isn't it?
Over the years, Valerie has extensively researched the area around Vimy Ridge, so we were quite intrigued to find out what she had for us.
This is the result of the fighting that took place to take all of the high ground in May of 1915. What I want to show you is actually about the Canadians, and it's on the inside.
We assumed Valerie was going to show us a small artifact with a name or identifying number on it.
The Canadians arrived here in the fall of 1916.
So we were curious as to what artifact she had at the church.
Going back and forth doing raids and so on and so forth in the month of March. And at some point they must have come here. Maybe it was a rest stop, maybe it was a field hospital, but they left their names.
That was when we realized what the artifact really was. The names of the soldiers etched in stone over 100 years ago.
So, O.E. McMahon, the 54th Canadian Battalion from BC.
Yeah.
BC Keeping, PEI. We have somebody from Toronto named W.H. Page with his number.
For a military historian, this is great evidence because not only do we have their names, but we also have their regimental service numbers. These are two crucial pieces of evidence you need when you begin to trace the history of these soldiers. The mission is to research these men, find out who they were, where they were from, and perhaps more importantly, what happened to them.
We had numerous names to investigate. At one point, Dave and I narrowed it down to 3 soldiers. W.H. Page from Toronto, Ian Bird, who was with the Princess Pats, and then a BC Keeping from PEI.
It would be wonderful to find one family to bring over here to connect with their World War I roots.
We immediately went to work accessing Ancestry's collection of family history records.
We searched all 3 names, and the most information we got was on a BC Keeping from PEI.
A family tree disclosed his full name as Benjamin Charles Keeping of Murray Harbor, PEI, born in 1891 to William and Marie Ann Keeping. Benjamin had a number of siblings, including 3 other brothers.
On Ancestry, we accessed his attestation papers, and it showed that Ben Keeping joined the Canadian Overseas Expeditionary Force on March 8, 1915.
The last crucial piece of evidence we discovered was that Ben Keeping had 2 children.
We were able to contact Sandy Stewart, his grandson. His mother, Olive, was BC Keeping's only daughter.
We had to bring Sandy to Vimy Ridge.
You must be Sandy.
Yes, you must be David.
So he would learn a few more details about his grandfather's perilous journey in the First World War.
And in a way, have him walk in the footsteps of his grandfather.
My grandfather died 7 years before I was born, so I never really had a chance to talk about his war experience, but I know he was a medical student at McGill when the war broke out, and he joined up with the Canadian General Hospital unit from McGill. And then in March of 1917, according to the records, he asked to be transferred to an artillery unit, the number 2 siege battery.
And what was the reason that he wanted to go to the number 2?
He had 3 other brothers who had also signed up, and he actually had a brother who was with the number 2, so possibly that's why.
So we have found something of your grandfather's.
But the thing is, it's a few kilometers from here, so we have to make a bit of a journey.
Okay,
You ready?
well, I've come this far, let's go.
All right.
Once we got to the church, we introduced Sandy to Valerie.
Sure.
Nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you.
That became a ruin in May of 1915 following the French attacks on Notre-Dame de Lorette. What's interesting for us as Canadians is that Canadians also passed through here during the attack on Vimy Ridge.
And of course, one of those Canadians was Sandy's grandfather, Benjamin Keeping.
This is why we brought you here.
Oh, wow.
He stood right here.
I can't believe this. I mean, when he was here, he could never have thought that a grandson he would never meet would be here 100 years later.
Although this was a grandfather he never met, there was an immediate connection.
There's hundreds and hundreds of Canadian soldiers who've etched their names into the walls around Vimy Ridge. And your grandfather is one of them.
It's amazing.
Guess you could say you're literally walking in his footsteps right now.
I guess I am. Wondering what it was like for him to be here, what he was thinking about, whether, you know, he knew when the next battle would be.
At that moment, Sandy's wife Heather joins him, and both Wayne and I realize just how important this research is to the family.
You know, it's kind of funny, I never really knew my grandfather because he died before I was born, but sort of creates feelings that I never knew I had.
It's been over 100 years since men and women like Ben Keeping served in the First World War.
Many of their stories, like this one, still remain untold.
To honor our ancestors, we must discover their stories.
And celebrate their grit, their tenacity, and above all, their humanity.